Cowboy was gifted a Cheyenne girl as a cruel joke, but what she said next made his blood run hot. Jack Brennan was not a man who drew attention to himself. For 15 long years, he had worked the cattle ranches that stretched across the wild Wyoming territory. It was the 1870s, a time when the West was still being carved out by hard men doing harder work. Jack was one of those men, though he never thought of himself as special or important. His face told the story of those years. The sun had baked his skin until it looked like old leather, lined and creased from squinting against the bright prairie light. His hands were calloused and scarred from rope burns, barbed wire cuts, and the countless small injuries that came with working cattle day after day. He was tall but not imposing, thin but wiry with muscle. His eyes were a faded blue, the kind that seemed to look past things rather than at them. Jack worked at the Double M Ranch, owned by a man named Clayton Moss. It was a big operation with maybe 30 or 40 head of cattle at any given time, and about a dozen men working the land. The ranch sat in a valley with mountains rising up on one side and open plains stretching out on the other. It was beautiful country if you had the time to notice such things, but most of the men were too busy or too tired to care. The other cowboys at the ranch were a rough bunch. They worked hard during the day, but come evening they worked just as hard at drinking, gambling, and causing trouble in the small town a few miles away. They spent their money as fast as they earned it, stumbling back to the bunkhouse in the early morning hours, smelling of whiskey and cheap perfume. Jack was different. He had never been much for drinking. Something about losing control of himself made him uncomfortable. While the other men rode into town every Saturday night, Jack stayed behind. He would sit on the porch of his small cabin, smoking his pipe and watching the stars come out. He kept a few books that he read over and over by candlelight. He saved nearly every dollar he earned, keeping it in a leather pouch hidden under a loose floorboard. This made him an oddity among the ranch hands. They could not understand a man who would not drink with them, who did not chase women, who seemed content with his own company. At first they had tried to include him, slapping him on the back and insisting he come along. But after enough polite refusals, their friendliness had turned to mockery. They called him St. Jack and the preacher, even though he rarely set foot in a church. They made jokes about him when he was within earshot, loud enough to ensure he heard every word. Jack never responded. He just kept his head down and did his work. He was good with horses, could rope a steer as well as any man there, and never complained about the long hours or dangerous work. That should have been enough to earn respect, but somehow it only seemed to make things worse. There was another thing that set Jack apart, though he tried not to show it too openly. He did not share the other men's attitudes toward the Cheyenne people who still lived in the area. Most of the ranch hands spoke of them with contempt, using ugly words that Jack hated. They told stories about fights and raids, always painting themselves as heroes and the Cheyenne as villains. But Jack had seen another side. He had once helped a Cheyenne family whose wagon had broken down on the road. He had given them food and helped repair their wheel, asking nothing in return. Another time, he had found a Cheyenne child who had wandered away from his family and was lost. Instead of ignoring the boy or worse, Jack had spent half a day tracking down the child's worried parents. These small acts of basic human decency were noticed by the other cowboys, and they did not approve. In their minds, you were either with them or against them. Jack's fairness toward people they hated made him suspicious in their eyes. They began to see him not just as odd, but as weak. A man who could not hate properly was not much of a man at all, they reasoned. As autumn came to Wyoming that year, painting the cottonwood trees gold and bringing cold winds down from the mountains, tensions on the ranch seemed to build. The work was hard as they prepared for winter, gathering cattle from the far ranges and making sure everything was secure before the snows came. Tempers were short, and the men were looking for entertainment, something to break up the monotony of work and sleep. One evening in late September, Jack had finished his work and was walking back to his cabin when he heard loud voices coming from the main bunkhouse. Laughter erupted, the kind of laughter that had a mean edge to it. Jack kept walking. Whatever joke they were sharing, he wanted no part of it. But the next evening, several of the ranch hands came to his cabin just as the sun was setting. There were 5 of them, led by a man named Dutch Keller. Dutch was the worst of the bunch, a big man with a red face and small, cruel eyes. He always seemed to be looking for someone to pick on, and Jack had been a favorite target for months. "Jack, my friend," Dutch called out, his voice falsely cheerful. "We have brought you a gift." Jack stood in his doorway, instantly wary. These men were not his friends, and they did not give gifts. "I do not want anything," he said quietly. "Now, do not be like that," Dutch continued, grinning widely. "We were in town last night. and we won something in a poker game. Something we thought you might appreciate, seeing as how you love the Indians so much." The other men laughed at this, and Jack felt his stomach tighten. Whatever was happening, it was not good. Dutch turned and gestured, and two of the men pushed forward a young woman. She was Cheyenne. That much was clear from her appearance. She looked to be about 20 years old, wearing a simple dress that had seen better days. Her long black hair was tangled, and there was a bruise on her cheek. But despite everything, she held herself with a dignity that made the ranch hand's laughter seem even more shameful. "There you go, St. Jack," Dutch announced, pushing the young woman toward the cabin. "She is all yours. A gift from your friends at the Double M." Jack felt something cold settle in his chest. He understood immediately what had happened, or at least enough of it. These men had not won this woman in any honest game. They had either bought her from someone who had no right to sell her, or they had taken her by force and were now pretending it was all a joke. Either way, it was wrong on every level Jack could imagine. "Take her back," Jack said, his voice steady despite the anger building inside him. "Take her back?" Dutch laughed. "Take her back where? She is yours now. We paid good money for her. Well, we paid something anyway. Consider it our way of helping you out. We know you get lonely out here by yourself." The other men were laughing harder now, enjoying the joke immensely. They wanted to see Jack squirm, wanted to see him either accept their cruel gift and prove he was a hypocrite, or refuse and confirm that he was too good for their company. Jack looked at the young woman. Her eyes met his, and he saw no fear there, only a kind of weary resignation mixed with contempt. She had been through this before, he realized. She expected nothing good from white men, and she had no reason to think he would be any different from the others. In that moment, Jack made a decision. He could not send her back out there with these men. Whatever they had planned, it would only be worse if he refused their gift, and he could not simply let her go, not with darkness falling and these wolves circling. "Fine," Jack said shortly. "Now leave." Dutch's grin faltered slightly. He had expected more of a reaction, more discomfort. "What? No thank you?" he asked. "I said leave." Jack's hand moved slightly, not quite touching the gun at his hip, but the gesture was clear enough. The men grumbled, but began to back away. "We will check in on you tomorrow," Dutch called out, still grinning. "See how you are enjoying your gift." They walked away laughing, heading back toward the bunkhouse. Jack watched until they were gone, then stepped back from his doorway. "Please come inside," he said to the young woman, keeping his voice gentle. "You will be safe here." She looked at him for a long moment, clearly trying to decide if he was telling the truth. Finally, with nowhere else to go and night falling fast, she stepped past him into the small cabin. Jack closed the door behind her and lit a lamp, the small flame pushing back the darkness. His cabin was simple but clean. There was a bed in one corner, a small table with 2 chairs, a stove for cooking and heat, and a few shelves with his meager possessions. It was not much, but it was honest and earned with his own labor. "You must be hungry," Jack said, moving toward his small store of food. "I have some bread and dried meat. Coffee, too, if you want it." The young woman stood in the middle of the room, watching him carefully. She had not spoken a single word yet, and Jack wondered if, perhaps, she did not speak English. Many of the Cheyenne he had encountered spoke some English, but not all. He set out food on the table and poured water into a cup from his bucket. "Please," he said, gesturing to the chair. "Eat whatever you want." Still, she did not move. Jack felt increasingly uncomfortable. He wanted to help her, but he did not know how. Every move he made might seem like a threat to someone who had been treated so badly by men who looked like him. "Look," he finally said, sitting down himself so he would seem less threatening. "I know those men said terrible things, but you can leave whenever you want. You do not have to stay here. I just did not want them to." He trailed off, not sure how to finish the sentence. That was when she spoke for the first time, and her words would change everything. The young woman's voice cut through the quiet cabin like a knife through cloth. Her English was perfect, with barely a trace of an accent. This surprised Jack, who had expected either silence or broken words. Instead, her speech was clear, precise, and filled with barely contained anger. "You think your kindness makes you different from them?" she said, her dark eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that made him want to look away. But he did not. He owed her at least the respect of meeting her gaze. Jack opened his mouth to respond, but she continued, her words coming faster now, like a dam that had finally broken after holding back water for too long. "I have been watching men like you my whole life," she said, taking a step closer to where he sat. "Men who think they are good because they do not actively participate in evil. Men who see wrong happening right in front of their eyes and do nothing. Men who tell themselves that silence is different from agreement, or... Each word landed like a stone thrown at glass. Jack felt something cracking inside his chest, some comfortable story he had been telling himself for years. Those men out there, she gestured toward the door, toward the bunkhouse where Dutch and the others were probably still laughing about their joke. At least they are honest about what they are. They do not pretend. They do not hide behind politeness while the world burns around them. Jack finally found his voice. I have never hurt anyone, he said quietly. I have tried to help when I could. Help? The word came out sharp and bitter. You helped fix a wagon wheel once. You returned a lost child. And then what? You went back to work for men who profit from our suffering.
You took their money.
You broke bread with them. You lived side by side with them and never once raised your voice against what they do. Yeah, she was pacing now, and Jack noticed that despite her anger, despite everything she had been through, she moved with a natural grace. She was beautiful, he realized, though that thought felt inappropriate given the circumstances. My name is Ayanna, she said suddenly, stopping her pacing to look at him again. Do you know what that means in my language? It means eternal blossom, forever flowering. My mother gave me that name because she hoped I would have a life that continued to grow and bloom no matter what happened. Her voice caught slightly, the first sign of emotion beyond anger. My mother died 3 years ago. She was killed when soldiers came to our village. They said we had to move again, that the land we were living on was needed by settlers. We had already moved twice before. Each time we were promised it would be the last time. Each time we believed because what choice did we have? Jack felt his hands tighten into fists on the table. He wanted to tell her he was sorry, but the words seemed too small, too meaningless. Some of the men in our village refused to move again, Ayanna continued. They said we would stand and fight if necessary. They were tired of running, tired of being pushed from place to place like animals. The soldiers did not give them a chance to fight. They came before dawn and set fire to our lodges while we slept. She wrapped her arms around herself, though the cabin was warm from the stove. I woke up to screaming and fire. My mother pushed me out through the back of our burning home. She was right behind me, and then she was not. I looked back and saw her fall. I never found out if it was the fire or a bullet that took her. Jack felt sick. He had heard stories like this before, whispered accounts that the other ranch hands dismissed as exaggerations or lies. He had never wanted to believe they were true, but deep down he had known. My father died 2 years before that, Ayanna said. He was a warrior, one of the best in our tribe. But he died slowly, from sadness more than anything else. He could not adjust to reservation life, to being told where he could go and what he could do. He stopped eating properly. He stopped speaking much. One winter morning he simply did not wake up. She walked to the small window and looked out at the darkness beyond. I had 2 brothers. The older one was killed in the same raid that took my mother. The younger one was sent to a boarding school where they cut his hair and forbade him to speak our language. I have not seen him in 2 years. I do not know if he even remembers me anymore. Jack wanted to speak, to offer some words of comfort, but his throat felt tight. What could he possibly say that would matter? After the village burned, those of us who survived scattered, Ayanna continued. Some went to the reservation. Some tried to find other villages that would take them in. I ended up with a group of families who were trying to make their way north, hoping things might be better there. We were stopped by men who said we were traveling illegally, that we needed papers we did not have. Her reflection in the dark window showed no expression, but Jack could hear the pain in her voice. They separated us. The old people were sent to the reservation. The younger ones were traded around like horses. I have been passed from one white man to another for the past 8 months. Some wanted workers, some wanted other things. She turned back to face him, and Jack saw tears on her cheeks, though her voice remained steady. I have been bought and sold 4 times. Each time I told myself I would survive. Each time I promised myself that if I could just endure, maybe there would be a chance to find my people again, to find my younger brother, to have some kind of life. And then I end up here, she said, gesturing around the cabin, given to you as a joke. A gift for the strange cowboy who does not drink with the others. The man who thinks a few small kindnesses make up for years of looking the other way. Jack stood up slowly, feeling the weight of her words pressing down on him. You are right, he said, and his voice sounded strange to his own ears. Everything you have said is true. I have been a coward. Ayanna looked surprised, as if she had expected him to argue or defend himself. I told myself I was just one man, Jack continued. I told myself that I could not change anything, so there was no point in trying. I told myself that not participating was the same as being innocent. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. But you are right. Silence is agreement. Watching evil happen and doing nothing is the same as helping it happen. He moved to his own window and looked out at the dark shapes of the ranch buildings. Somewhere out there, Dutch and the others were probably asleep by now, content in their cruelty, never questioning whether what they did was right or wrong. I have watched things I knew were wrong, Jack said quietly. I have heard stories about raids on villages, about families torn apart, about land stolen through lies and broken promises. I have seen Moss, my boss, meet with men who trade in weapons and people. I have seen him falsify records and pay off officials. And I did nothing because I needed the job, needed the money I was saving. He turned back to Ayana. What was I saving it for? I think I was saving it because having a goal, any goal, gave me a reason to keep going day after day. But saving money while watching injustice happen all around me, that is not a goal worth having. Ayana studied him carefully. So what will you do now? Now that you have admitted what you are? It was a fair question, and Jack did not have a ready answer. But as he stood there, looking at this young woman who had lost everything and still found the strength to speak truth to him, he felt something change inside himself. Was it a fire being lit, starting small but growing steadily hotter? I do not know exactly, he admitted, but I know I cannot go back to the way things were. I cannot work alongside those men tomorrow and pretend nothing has changed. I cannot take Moss's money anymore knowing where it comes from. Words are easy, Ayana said. I have heard many words from white men. They promise things they never intend to keep. They say whatever makes them feel better in the moment. You are right about that too, Jack agreed. So I will not make you promises, but I will tell you this. You can stay here as long as you need to. This cabin is small, but I will sleep on the floor. You take the bed. And tomorrow we will figure out what comes next. What comes next? Ayana asked. Those men will come back. They will want to see the results of their joke. What will you tell them? Jack thought about this. She was right. Dutch and the others would return, probably expecting to find him embarrassed or uncomfortable. They would make crude jokes and watch his reaction, feeding off his discomfort like vultures on a carcass. I will tell them you are under my protection, Jack said. I will tell them that anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly. And when they laugh at you? When they try to take me anyway? Jack walked to the corner where he kept his rifle. It was a Winchester, well-maintained and always loaded. He had used it to hunt game and protect cattle from predators. He had never pointed it at another man. Then I will stop them, he said simply. Ayana watched him for a long moment. Finally, she nodded slowly. We will see, she said. We will see if you are different from the others, or if you are just better at pretending. She moved to the table and finally sat down, taking a piece of bread and eating it slowly. Jack busied himself preparing the floor for sleeping, laying out blankets and trying not to think too hard about what he had just committed himself to. As the night deepened around them, they sat in silence. But it was a different kind of silence than before. Something had shifted between them, some unspoken understanding that they were both standing at a crossroads. What happened next would determine not just their immediate future, but the kind of people they would be. Jack lay down on his makeshift bed on the floor, staring up at the dark ceiling. Sleep was a long time coming. His mind raced with possibilities and consequences. He had worked at this ranch for 15 years. It was all he knew. And now he was ready to throw it all away because a young woman had held up a mirror and forced him to see himself clearly for the first time. His blood felt hot in his veins, not from attraction but from something deeper. A sense of purpose he had been missing for years. A feeling that finally, after so long, he might actually do something that mattered. The first light of dawn came through the cabin window, painting everything in shades of gray and gold. Jack had barely slept. Every sound during the night had made him alert, listening for footsteps or voices that might signal trouble. But the night had passed quietly, and now a new day was beginning. He sat up carefully, not wanting to wake Ayana if she was still sleeping. But when he looked toward the bed, he saw that she was already awake, sitting with her back against the wall, watching him with those same careful, assessing eyes. "Good morning," Jack said quietly. She nodded but did not speak. The anger from the previous night seemed to have settled into something else, a watchful waiting. She was trying to figure out if his words had meant anything, or if they had just been empty sounds made in the heat of the moment. Jack stood and stretched, his back aching from sleeping on the hard floor. He moved to the stove and began preparing coffee, going through the familiar morning routine. But everything felt different now. The simple act of making breakfast felt charged with meaning, as if every movement was being judged. "I have been thinking," Jack said as he worked, "about what you said last night, about all of it. Ayana watched him but remained silent, waiting for him to continue. You asked what comes next, Jack went on. I think I have an idea, but I need to know more. I need to understand exactly what is happening, not just the pieces I have seen, but the whole picture. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and brought them to the table, sitting down across from where Ayana now sat. Will you tell me? Everything you know about how you ended up here, about the men who traded you, about the system that makes this possible? For the first time, something like surprise crossed Ayana's face. Why? She asked. What difference does it make? Because if I am going to fight against something, I need to understand what I am fighting, Jack said. I have been ignorant by choice for too long. That ends now. Ayana took a sip of the coffee, her hands wrapped around the cup as if drawing warmth from it. Then she began to speak, and Jack listened to a story that made his stomach turn. She told him about the network of traders who moved between frontier towns and reservations, buying and selling people like goods. She explained how some government officials looked the other way or even participated, taking bribes to ignore what was happening. She described how families were deliberately separated, children taken to schools far away where they were forbidden to speak their own language or practice their own customs. The goal is to erase us, Ayana said, her voice flat but her eyes burning. Not by killing us all, though they do plenty of that too, but by taking away everything that makes us who we are. Our land, our language, our families, our traditions. They want us to disappear, either by death or by becoming so much like them that we forget we were ever different. Jack felt his jaw tighten as he listened. He had known things were bad, but hearing it laid out so clearly, so completely, made it impossible to hide behind comfortable ignorance anymore. And Moss? Jack asked. My boss. What is his role in all this? Ayana looked at him carefully before answering. Your boss is one of the worst. He does not just ignore what happens. He profits from it directly. He sells weapons to men on both sides, stirring up conflict so he can sell more. He buys land that was taken through broken treaties. He has connections with the traders who move people like me around. Jack had suspected some of this, had seen strange meetings and heard whispered conversations, but he had never put it all together, had never wanted to see the full picture. Now he could not look away. There's more, Ayana continued. There are Army investigators who have been asking questions. They know something is wrong, but they do not have proof. People are afraid to talk. Those who do speak up have a way of disappearing or meeting with accidents. An idea was forming in Jack's mind, dangerous and possibly foolish, but it would not leave him alone. What if we gave them proof? He asked. Ayana set down her cup. What do you mean? Moss keeps records, Jack said, thinking out loud now. He has to. He is too greedy not to document everything so he can keep track of his money. I have seen him working on ledgers late at night in his office. I never paid much attention before, but now I am thinking those records might show everything. The weapon sales, the land deals, the payments to officials. And how would you get these records? Ayana asked. You think he will just hand them over? No, Jack admitted. But I have been working here for 15 years. I know this ranch better than anyone except Moss himself. I know where he keeps things, when he is away, how the locks work. Ayana leaned forward, interested now despite herself. You are talking about stealing from your boss. You understand what that means? If you are caught, they will not just fire you. They will hang you or shoot you. I know, Jack said. But what is the alternative? Going back to work today and pretending nothing has changed? Watching this continue while I do nothing? You were right last night. I have been a coward for too long. They sat in silence for a moment, both of them understanding that they were discussing something that could not be undone once started. This was not a small decision, not a minor act of rebellion. This was setting themselves against powerful men, who would not hesitate to use violence to protect their interests. Even if you got the records, Ayana said slowly, who would you give them to? You said yourself that officials are being paid off. Not all of them, Jack said. The Army investigators at Fort Laramie. They are federal, not local. They answer to people in Washington, not to men like Moss. If we could get the evidence to them, they could act on it. It is a long ride to Fort Laramie, Ayana pointed out. 4 days there and back, maybe more. And Moss will know the records are missing long before you return. Jack nodded slowly. Which means once we start this, there is no going back. We would have to leave and not return. The weight of what he was suggesting settled over both of them. Jack would be giving up everything he had built over 15 years. His job, his home, the money he had saved, all of it would be gone. But as he thought about it, he realized that none of those things mattered as much as he had believed. What good was money if it came from blood? What value was a home if he could not live with himself inside it? There is something else, Ayanna said quietly. If we do this, if we expose Moss and his network, there are others who could be helped. I know where some of my people are, families who are being held or traded. With Moss and his connections gone, they might have a chance to escape, to find their way to safety. Jack looked at her and saw hope mixed with fear in her eyes. She wanted to believe this could work, but she had been disappointed too many times to trust easily. Then we need a plan, Jack said. A real plan, not just hope and good intentions. Over the next hours, they worked it out together. Ayanna proved to have a sharp mind for strategy. She knew the locations of various settlements and hiding places, knowledge gained from her months of being moved around the territory. Jack contributed his detailed understanding of the ranch's operations, when Moss would be away, which men could be trusted and which could not. They learned that Moss would be traveling to town in 2 days for a meeting with a cattle buyer. He would be gone for most of the day. That would be their chance to get into his office and copy the records. They could not take the originals. That would be noticed immediately, but Jack could copy the most damaging information, enough to give the investigators something to work with. After that, they would need to move quickly. They would ride to Fort Laramie with the evidence. If they pushed hard, they could make it in 3 days. Once they delivered the information, they would have to trust that the Army investigators would act on it. And after? Ayanna asked. After we give them the evidence, what then? We cannot come back here. Jack had been thinking about that too. I have money saved, he said. Enough to buy a small piece of land somewhere. Not much, but enough to start over. Maybe near the reservation where some of your people are. I could raise horses, sell them honestly. It is work I know how to do. And me? Ayanna asked. What role do I have in this future you are imagining? Jack met her eyes directly. Whatever role you choose. You could stay, help with the work if you wanted, or you could take some of the money and use it to search for your brother, to reconnect with your people. I am not looking to own you or control you. I am offering partnership, if you want it. Ayanna was quiet for a long time, studying his face as if trying to read his soul. Finally, she spoke. I will help you with this plan. We will get the evidence and take it to Fort Laramie. But after that, I make no promises about what comes next. I need to see if your actions match your words. That is fair, Jack agreed. More than fair. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Jack went about his normal work on the ranch, trying to act as if nothing had changed. It was harder than he expected. Every time he saw one of the other cowboys, especially Dutch, he felt anger rise up in his throat, but he kept his face neutral, his manner calm. Dutch did come by the cabin that evening, just as Jack had predicted. He had 2 other men with him, all of them grinning like they were about to witness something entertaining. Well, well, Dutch said loudly. How was your night, St. Jack? Did you enjoy your gift? Jack stepped out of the cabin, pulling the door closed behind him. He did not want these men anywhere near Ayanna. She is staying with me, he said flatly. She is under my protection now. Dutch's grin faltered slightly. Under your protection? What does that mean? It means exactly what it sounds like, Jack said, his hand resting casually near his gun. She stays here. No one bothers her. No one comes near this cabin without my permission. Is that clear? The 3 men exchanged glances. They had expected Jack to be embarrassed or uncomfortable, to reject their gift and prove he was too good for them. They had not expected this calm, direct claim of ownership and protection. Now hold on, Dutch started to say, but Jack cut him off. I am not discussing this, Jack said, his voice still quiet but with steel underneath. She stays. Anyone who has a problem with that can settle it right here, right now. There was a long moment of tension. Dutch was bigger than Jack, and he had 2 friends with him. But Jack had his hand near his gun, and there was something in his eyes that had not been there before. A willingness to follow through on his threat. Finally, Dutch stepped back. Fine, he said, trying to save face. Keep her. We were just having a laugh anyway. No need to get all serious about it. The 3 men walked away, but Jack could hear them muttering among themselves. He knew this was not over. Word would spread about what had happened. Some of the men would laugh about it, but others would see it as a challenge. Jack had drawn a line, and lines had a way of forcing people to choose sides. He went back into the cabin where Ayanna was standing by the window, having watched the whole exchange. You were right, she said. They came back. And they will come back again, Jack said. Which is why we need to move quickly. 2 days, and then we make our move. Ayanna nodded. 2 days to prepare, to gather supplies, to steel themselves for what was coming. 2 days before they would either succeed in exposing a corrupt system or fail and face consequences too terrible to fully imagine. But for the first time in 15 years, Jack felt truly alive. The fire that had started burning in his chest the night before was growing stronger. He was finally going to do something that mattered, something he could be proud of. Whatever happened next, at least he would not be a coward anymore. The 2 days passed slowly, each hour feeling like it stretched into 2. Jack went about his work on the ranch, mending fences and tending to the horses, all while his mind raced with their plan. Every time he saw Moss or one of the other ranch hands, he had to force himself to act normal, to smile when expected, to respond to jokes he did not find funny. Ayanna stayed mostly in the cabin during those days. It was safer that way, keeping her out of sight of the other men. But she was not idle. She used the time to prepare supplies for their journey, checking and rechecking everything they would need for the long ride to Fort Laramie. She also shared more information with Jack about the locations of Cheyenne families she knew about, drawing rough maps in the dirt outside the cabin when no one was watching. On the evening of the second day, Jack confirmed that Moss would be leaving early the next morning for his meeting in town. The cattle buyer was coming from Denver, and Moss wanted to make a good impression, which meant he would be gone most of the day. This was their window. That night, Jack and Ayanna went over the plan one final time. Jack would wait until mid-morning when most of the ranch hands would be out working the far pastures. He would enter Moss's office, which was in the main ranch house, and locate the ledgers. He would not take them, that would be noticed immediately, but he would copy the most important pages, the ones that showed the illegal transactions. Ayanna would keep watch from a position where she could see both the road leading to town and the paths the ranch hands would use coming back from the fields. If anyone approached unexpectedly, she would signal Jack by ringing the old bell that hung near the barn, claiming she had seen a coyote threatening the chickens if anyone asked. It was a simple plan, which was good because complicated plans had more places where things could go wrong, but simple did not mean safe. If Jack was caught in Moss's office, there would be no easy explanation, no way to talk himself out of trouble. Morning came with a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. Jack watched from his cabin window as Moss emerged from the main house, dressed in his best clothes, his beard freshly trimmed. He climbed into his wagon and drove off down the road toward town, dust rising behind the wheels. Jack waited. Patience was crucial now. He forced himself to eat breakfast, to drink his coffee slowly, to act as if this was just another ordinary day. Around mid-morning, he saw the other ranch hands heading out to the western pasture where they were moving cattle to fresh grazing land. Dutch led the group, still throwing occasional dark looks toward Jack's cabin. "It is time," Jack said quietly to Ayanna. She nodded, her face calm, but her eyes alert. They had both dressed in their riding clothes, ready to leave quickly once Jack had what they needed. Their horses were already saddled, hidden in a small grove of trees behind the cabin where they would not be noticed. Jack walked across the ranch yard, trying to look casual, like he was just taking a break from work. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure anyone nearby would hear it. The main house stood quiet in the morning sun, empty except for the cook, who would be in the kitchen at the back of the building. He climbed the front steps and pushed open the door. The house was nicer inside than anywhere else on the ranch, with real furniture and carpets that Moss had brought in from back east. Jack had only been inside a handful of times in all his years working here. It felt strange being in this space that represented everything Moss valued, all the wealth he had accumulated through means, both legal and otherwise. Moss's office was on the first floor, a room lined with shelves holding books and papers. Jack moved quickly to the large desk that dominated the center of the room. He tried the drawers. Locked. He had expected this and pulled out a thin piece of metal he had shaped specifically for this purpose. It took him 3 tries, his hands shaking slightly, but finally the lock clicked open. Inside the drawer were several leather-bound ledgers. Jack pulled them out carefully, laying them on the desk. He opened the first one and began reading. At first, the entries seemed ordinary enough. Cattle purchases, sales, wages paid to workers. But as he flipped further into the book, other entries appeared. Payments to men with no job titles, receipts for goods that were listed only as merchandise with no further description, transactions with amounts that seemed far too large for legitimate ranch business. Jack had brought paper and a pencil. He began copying, his hand moving as quickly as he could while still keeping the writing legible. He documented dates, amounts, names, some of the names he recognized, local officials, traders, even a few army officers. His stomach turned as he realized how widespread the corruption was. He was halfway through copying the second ledger when he heard it. The bell. Sharp and urgent, ringing 3 times, then stopping. That was the signal. Someone was coming. Jack's hands moved frantically, trying to copy just a few more entries.
But the bell rang again, more insistent this time. He had to stop.
He carefully closed the ledgers and returned them to the drawer exactly as he had found them, then locked it again. He folded the papers he had written on and tucked them inside his shirt. He was just closing the office door when he heard voices outside. Male voices, angry and loud. His blood went cold. Those were not the voices of ranch hands returning from work. Something else was happening. Jack moved to a window and looked out carefully. What he saw made his heart sink. Dutch and 4 other men were in the ranch yard, and they had Ayanna. Junior got hurt, but they surrounded her, and Dutch was holding her arm roughly. She must have been caught while trying to ring the warning bell.
Jack's mind raced. He could slip out the back of the house, get to his horse, and ride away.
The evidence was inside his shirt. He could still complete the mission, still get the information to Fort Laramie. But that would mean leaving Ayanna behind, leaving her to face whatever punishment these men would devise. It was not even a choice. Not really. He had promised she would be under his protection. More than that, she had trusted him enough to be part of this plan. He could not abandon her now, no matter what it cost him. Jack walked out the front door of the house, his hand resting on his gun. "Let her go, Dutch," he called out, his voice carrying across the yard. Dutch looked up, and a slow smile spread across his face. Well, St. Jack. "What were you doing in the boss's house?" "That is none of your concern," Jack said, walking down the steps. "I said let her go." "See, that is where you are wrong," Dutch said, his grip tightening on Ayanna's arm. "Everything that happens on this ranch is my concern, especially when I see someone sneaking around where they do not belong." The other men had spread out slightly, forming the loose semicircle. Jack recognized them all. These were the worst of the ranch hands, the ones who enjoyed cruelty for its own sake. Be bulled out of them in a fair fight. But he also knew that he was not going to walk away. "Last chance," Jack said quietly. "Let her go." Dutch laughed. "Or what? You will shoot me? You do not have the spine for that, Jack. You have never shot anything but rabbits and maybe a coyote or 2. You think you can shoot a man? Try me and find out," Jack said, and he drew his gun. Everything happened very fast after that. Dutch pushed Ayanna away and went for his own weapon. Jack's gun came up and fired before he even fully realized what he was doing. The bullet caught Dutch in the shoulder, spinning him around. He fell to the ground, cursing and clutching at the wound. The other men froze for a moment, shocked. They had expected Jack to back down, to prove he was all talk. Instead, he had shot Dutch without hesitation. But there were still 4 of them and only one of Jack, and their surprise was already turning to anger. "Get him!" one of them shouted, and they rushed forward. Jack fired again, aiming for legs this time, trying to stop them without killing. Another man went down. But then they were on him, and his gun was knocked from his hand. He fought with everything he had, fists flying, but they were too many and too strong. He felt blows raining down on him, pain exploding in his ribs, his face, his back. Through the chaos, he heard Ayanna screaming, heard the sounds of her fighting too. She had not run when she had the chance. She was trying to help him. Then there was a new sound. Horses, many of them, coming fast. The beating stopped suddenly, and Jack looked up through eyes that were already swelling shut. Through his blurred vision, he saw men in army uniforms riding into the ranch yard, guns drawn. "Everyone stop right now!" an officer shouted, his voice carrying authority that cut through the chaos. "Drop your weapons and step back." The ranch hands immediately complied, stepping away from Jack with their hands raised. Jack tried to stand, but only made it to his knees. His whole body felt like one giant bruise. The army officer dismounted and walked over to where Jack knelt in the dust. "Are you Jack Brennan?" he asked. Jack nodded, confused. "How did this officer know his name?" "We received word that you might be in trouble," the officer said. "A young Cheyenne woman sent someone to find us yesterday. She said you were planning to expose corruption at this ranch and that you might need help." Jack turned his head painfully to look at Ayanna. She stood a few feet away, dirt on her dress and a cut on her lip, but her eyes were clear and steady. She had planned ahead, had sent word to the army investigators as insurance, just in case something went wrong. She had protected him even as he had tried to protect her. "The evidence?" Jack managed to say, his voice rough. "In my shirt?" "Ledger entries. Proof of weapon sales, bribery, illegal trading." The officer carefully helped Jack remove the folded papers from inside his shirt. He unfolded them and began reading, his expression growing darker with each line. "This is exactly what we needed," he said quietly. "This connects to information we already had." With this, we can bring charges not just against Moss, but against the whole network. More soldiers were rounding up the ranch hands, securing them with ropes. Dutch was being tended to by an army medic, his shoulder bandaged. He glared at Jack with pure hatred. But there was nothing he could do now. "Where is Moss?" the officer asked. "In town," Jack said. "Meeting with a cattle buyer. He should be back by evening." "We will wait for him," the officer said. "And we will be searching this property thoroughly. If there is more evidence here, we will find it." Jack finally managed to stand with help from 2 soldiers. Every part of his body hurt, but he was alive. More importantly, they had succeeded. The evidence was in army hands now. Moss and his corrupt network would face justice. Ayanna walked over to him, and for a moment they just looked at each other. No words were needed. They had both taken enormous risks, had both been willing to sacrifice everything for this moment. And against all odds, it had worked. "You planned ahead," Jack said, gesturing toward the army soldiers. "You sent word before we even started." "I learned long ago not to trust in single plans," Ayanna said. "Always have a backup. Always think 2 steps ahead. That is how you survive." Jack smiled, which hurt his split lip, but he did not care. "Remind me never to underestimate you." "Good advice," she said. And for the first time since he had met her, he saw the hint of a smile on her face. The army soldiers set up camp on the ranch that evening, waiting for Moss to return. Jack sat on the porch of his cabin, his body aching from the beating he had taken. The army medic had cleaned his wounds and wrapped his ribs, which were bruised but not broken. He would heal, though it would take time. Ayanna sat beside him, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and red. The soldiers had questioned them both extensively, taking down every detail they could remember. The officer in charge, a Captain Williams, had been particularly interested in the names Jack had copied from the ledgers. He said those names would help them build cases against multiple people involved in the illegal operations. As darkness fell, they heard the sound of a wagon approaching. Moss was returning from town, completely unaware of what awaited him. Jack watched as the wagon rolled into the ranch yard, and Moss climbed down, humming to himself. He had obviously had a successful day. Captain Williams stepped out from the shadows, 6 soldiers behind him. "Clayton Moss?" he called out. Moss stopped, his expression shifting from contentment to confusion to fear in the space of a few seconds. "What is this?" he demanded, trying to sound authoritative, but his voice shook slightly. "You are under arrest for illegal weapons trading, bribery of government officials, and involvement in the illegal trafficking of persons," Captain Williams said formally. "You will be taken to Fort Laramie to await trial." Moss's face went red, then white. His eyes swept across the ranch yard, taking in the soldiers, the captured ranch hands, and finally landing on Jack sitting on his cabin porch. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed immediately by rage. "You!" he spat, pointing at Jack. "You did this, after everything I gave you. A job, a home, steady pay for 15 years. This is how you repay me?" Jack stood slowly, painfully, and walked to the edge of the porch. "You gave me a job," he agreed, "and I worked hard for every dollar you paid me. But that does not buy my silence about the things you have done, the people you have hurt, the lives you have destroyed for profit." "You self-righteous fool," Moss snarled. "Do you think this changes anything? Do you think taking me down will fix the world? There are 100 men ready to step into my place. 1,000. What I do, what I built, it is just how things work out here." "Maybe," Jack said quietly. "But that does not mean we should not try to change it. Every network has to start somewhere, and every network can be taken apart piece by piece. You are just the first piece." Moss laughed bitterly as soldiers moved forward to place him in chains. "You have made powerful enemies, Brennan. You and that Cheyenne girl. You think you will be safe once I am gone? You think the others involved will just let this slide?" Captain Williams stepped between them. "That is enough, Moss. Take him away." As the soldiers led Moss to a wagon that would transport him to the fort, he kept shouting threats and curses. Jack watched until the wagon disappeared into the darkness. Then he sat back down heavily. His legs were shaking. Whether from pain or emotion, he was not sure. "He is right about one thing," Ayanna said softly. "This will not be the end. Others will be angry about what we have done." "I know," Jack said, "but Captain Williams promised us protection. And once the trials start, once everything becomes public, it will be harder for people to act against us without drawing attention." Over the next few days, the ranch was thoroughly searched. The soldiers found more evidence hidden in various places, including records of weapons shipments and correspondence with corrupt officials. Each new discovery strengthened the case against Moss and his associates. Jack and Ayanna gave testimony multiple times each session, recorded carefully by Army clerks. It was exhausting, reliving everything, explaining all the details. But it was also necessary. Their words would help ensure that justice was done. The story began appearing in newspapers across the territory. Journalists traveled to the ranch to interview Jack and Ayanna, though Captain Williams carefully controlled what information was released. My headlines spoke of corruption exposed, of a brave cowboy, and a courageous Cheyenne woman who had risked everything to reveal the truth. Jack found the attention uncomfortable. He had never wanted to be famous or important. He had just wanted to do what was right. But Ayanna seemed to understand the value of the publicity. "Let them write their stories," she said. "The more people know about what happened, the harder it will be for others to make us disappear quietly." The trials began 3 months later. Jack and Ayanna traveled to Fort Laramie under Army escort to give their testimony in person. The courtroom was packed with people, some who supported them and many who did not. Jack faced hostile stares and whispered insults, but he kept his composure and told the truth clearly and completely. Moss was convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. Several other men, including corrupt officials and traitors, also received prison sentences. Dutch and the ranch hands who had attacked Jack were convicted of assault and received shorter sentences. It was not perfect justice, but it was something. It was accountability where before there had been none. After the trials concluded, Jack and Ayanna found themselves at another crossroads. The ranch had been seized by the federal government, so there was no job to return to even if Jack had wanted one. He still had most of his savings, carefully stored in a bank in town. It was enough to start over, but where? They talked about it for days, considering their options. Captain Williams had offered Jack a position as a civilian scout for the Army, but Jack declined. He had no interest in working for the government, even the part of it that had helped them. Ayanna had received word that her younger brother was alive and living at a reservation 200 miles to the north. She wanted to find him, to reconnect with what remained of her family. In the end, the decision felt natural. Jack used his savings to buy a small piece of land near the reservation where Ayanna's brother lived. It was not much, just 40 acres with a stream running through it and decent grazing for horses. But it was theirs, purchased legally with honest money. No one could take it away. They built a simple cabin together, working side by side. Jack had experience with construction from his years on ranches, and Ayanna proved to be a quick learner and hard worker. The cabin was small but solid, with a good roof and a stone fireplace that would keep them warm through the winter. Jack began raising horses, starting with just 3 mares and a stallion he purchased from an honest breeder. He had a good eye for horse flesh and a gentle way of training that produced animals known for their calm temperaments. Word spread, and people began seeking him out, willing to pay fair prices for well-trained horses. Ayanna found her brother at the reservation. He was 14 now, and the years at the boarding school had changed him. He spoke English more easily than Cheyenne, and he seemed uncomfortable with many of the traditional ways. But he remembered his sister, and the joy of their reunion brought tears to Jack's eyes when he witnessed it. Slowly, carefully, Ayanna began helping her brother reconnect with their culture. She taught him stories their mother had told, songs their father had sung. It was painful for both of them, remembering what they had lost, but it was also healing. They were rebuilding something that others had tried to destroy. As seasons passed, Jack and Ayanna's relationship evolved. What had begun in crisis and conflict gradually became something deeper. They were partners in every sense, working together to build their small horse ranch, supporting each other through difficult days and celebrating small victories together. They never formally married. The laws of the time would have made such a union difficult and potentially dangerous, but in the ways that mattered, they were committed to each other. They shared a home, a life, a purpose. That was enough. Their property became known as a place where people of all backgrounds were treated fairly. Jack refused to cheat anyone, whether they were white settlers, Cheyenne families, or anyone else. He charged honest prices and delivered what he promised. In a time and place where such integrity was rare, it earned him respect. Ayanna worked with families on the reservation, helping them navigate the complex and often cruel bureaucracy that governed their lives. She translated documents, explained legal processes, and advocated for fair treatment. It was frustrating work, full of setbacks and small defeats, but occasionally there were victories that made it worthwhile. News of Moss's imprisonment and the corruption scandal continued to ripple outward. Other investigations were launched in different territories. More corrupt officials were exposed and removed from power. It did not fix everything, not by a long shot, but it created small spaces where fairness had a chance to take root. Years passed, Jack's hair turned gray at the temples, then white. Lines deepened around his eyes and mouth. But he remained strong and active, able to work a full day with horses without complaint. Ayanna aged too, though she seemed to Jack as beautiful at 35 as she had been at 20. The hardness that had been in her eyes when they first met had softened, replaced by something warmer but still fierce when circumstances required. They took in others over the years. A young Cheyenne woman who had escaped from traders found her way to their door, and they gave her shelter and safety. An older white man, broken by grief after losing his family, worked on their ranch for several years before eventually moving on. A mixed-blood child abandoned by both communities grew up in their home, learning to train horses and finding acceptance he had never known elsewhere. Their small piece of land became a refuge, a place where people could be treated with dignity regardless of their background. It was not perfect. There were still conflicts, still prejudices that could not be completely overcome. But it was better than what had been before, and that had to count for something. One evening, perhaps 15 years after the day Ayanna had been pushed into his cabin as a cruel joke, Jack sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset. Ayanna joined him, settling into the chair beside his with a satisfied sigh. The day's work was done, the horses were fed and settled for the night, and the world felt peaceful. "Do you ever regret it?" Ayanna asked suddenly. "Everything you gave up? The easier life you could have had if you had just stayed silent?" Jack thought about it for a moment, really considered the question. He thought about the ranch he had left behind, the money he had spent, the years of hard work building something new. He thought about the enemies he had made and the dangers they had faced. "No," he said finally. "Not for a single moment. That night you came into my cabin. The things you said to me, they woke me up. I had been sleepwalking through life, telling myself comfortable lies about who I was. You held up a mirror and made me see the truth." He turned to look at her, this woman who had changed the entire course of his life. "You asked me that night if my kindness made me different from the others. The answer then was no. I was not different, I was just quieter about my failings. But you gave me a chance to actually become different, to become someone who acts instead of just watching." Ayanna reached over and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "You know what I remember most from that night?" she said. Not the anger in my own voice, though I was very angry. "What I remember is the moment I saw something change in your eyes, like a fire being lit. I had seen many white men make promises, but I had never seen one look like they were ready to burn down their whole world to keep a promise." "My blood ran hot that night," Jack admitted. "It still does when I think about injustice, about people being treated as less than human. You did that. You lit that fire, and it has never gone out." They sat together in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared below the horizon and stars began appearing in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance they could hear horses nickering softly to each other. Closer by, the sound of Ayanna's brother singing a traditional song as he worked on repairing a saddle. Jack thought about the man he had been 15 years ago, accepting cruelty and injustice as just the way things were. He thought about how easy it would have been to stay that man, to keep his head down and his conscience quiet. And he thought about how grateful he was that Ayanna had not let him remain comfortable in his cowardice. "The best thing that ever happened to me," Jack said softly, "was being forced to stop being a coward, being forced to look at myself clearly and decide what kind of man I wanted to be. You gave me that gift even though giving it cost you so much pain." "We gave each other gifts," Ayanna replied. "You gave me hope when I had none left. You showed me that not all white men were the same, that change was possible. That was worth everything we went through to get here." As night settled fully over their small ranch, Jack Brennan felt a contentment he had never known in all his years working for other men, saving money for no particular purpose, drifting through life without meaning. He had found purpose. He had found partnership. He had found a way to live that he could be proud of. The cruel joke that had brought them together had transformed into something neither of those laughing cowboys could have imagined. It had become a life built on mutual respect, shared struggle, and the determination to create something better than what had existed before. And if Jack's blood still ran hot when he thought about injustice, that was fine with him. Better to burn with righteous anger and act on it than to stay cold and do nothing. That was the lesson Ayanna had taught him on that first night, and it was a lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his days.